Hello, welcome to Ink Spills. Today we are going to be diving deep into Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and not one, but six of the film adaptations. If you don't know who I am Taryn Tyler. I am an indie writer and book enthusiast, specifically, but not exclusively, Gothic books and poetry. Just as a warning, this is not a spoiler-free discussion, so if you haven't read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and want to, or you haven't seen any of these film adaptations and you would like to, I recommend going and doing that and coming back. The only film adaptation that I will try not to spoil too much is Guillermo del Toro's new version, because as of filming, it hasn't been released on Netflix yet. I was fortunate enough to see one of the theater screenings last month. So I will be sharing some of my thoughts on the themes and whether or not I recommend it at the end of this video. But let's start with Mary Shelley's classic Gothic novel, Frankenstein. Many of us know the origin story of Frankenstein that Mary Shelley writes about in her introduction, in which she and her husband and Lord Byron, the famous romantic poet, were all sitting around one November evening while it was stormy outside, telling each other and reading ghost stories. And they decided that they would all go and write a ghost story. Mary Shelley was the only one who finished hers, and it ended up being this much, much beloved classic. She writes about the experience. I busied myself to think of a story to rival those which had excited us to the task, one which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror, one to make the reader dread to look round, to curdle the blood, and quicken the beating of the heart. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is told in 3 parts. The first part begins with the framing device of an explorer trying to find the North Pole. His ship gets trapped in the ice. They see a humanoid creature in the distance, and soon thereafter finds a man who is very ill and brings him on board. The man he finds is Victor Frankenstein, who then proceeds to tell him his story. Victor Frankenstein was raised with his parents' ward Elizabeth and his 2 younger brothers until his mother died quite unexpectedly of scarlet fever just before he went to college. He then uses his interest in biology to create a creature from the materials of dead bodies. But upon creating this creature, when it comes to life, he is immediately horrified by what he has done and falls into a fever and is sick for several months, while his friend Henry Clerval comes and nurses him back to health. When he finally goes back home a year and a half later, he comes just as his youngest brother has died, murdered by a stranger in the wood, and a longtime servant and member of the household is accused of the murder, and she is tried and found guilty. But Victor Frankenstein knows that it was not Justine who killed his little brother, but the monster he in fact created. Mary Shelley's writing style really shines through when she is describing nature, and particularly landscapes and weather. She really uses it to drive home the feeling of harshness and just create a really eerie feeling of suspense in the atmosphere. The book is largely a psychological character-based story, so she really uses the landscape and atmosphere to show the characters' emotions. Moving on into the second of the 3 sections of the novel, Victor does not tell anyone about the creature he has created that is now wreaking havoc on his family. Instead, he goes into the wilderness to be alone, and he encounters the creature. He and the creature fight, but the creature very easily overpowers him and tells him his own story. Upon being created, the creature was able to find some clothes in Frankenstein's home, and he goes out into the wilderness and lives off of nuts and berries. He tries to join some settlements, but no one will allow him to come close. They chase him out as soon as they see him before he's had a chance to do anything dangerous or anything at all. Eventually, he finds a hovel to hide in and find shelter that is connected to a cottage, and he develops a parasocial relationship with the inhabitants of the cottage, even helps them out, cutting wood for them at night, and he continues to eat nuts and berries from the forest rather than steal from their food because he can tell that they are very poor and don't have very much to share. He becomes very invested in this family's story and learns from them how to speak and how to read. He eventually works up the courage to introduce himself to the father of the family, who is blind, while the children are out on a walk. He tells the father that he is alone in the world, but that there are some friends he hopes will take him in and think of him kindly. I tenderly love these friends. I have, unknown to them, been for many months in the habits of daily kindness towards them, but they believe that I wish to injure them, and it is that prejudice which I wish to overcome. But when the children come back from the walk, they see what the creature looks like, and they drive him away. The creature wanders off into the woods again in despair. He comes back hoping to try again, but the family has left. They don't want anything to do with him. They don't want him to be able to find them. And in a fit of rage, he burns down the cottage. He finds in the coat of the clothes that he found in Victor's home a journal explaining how he was created and some other things that were going on in Victor's life at the time, including where to find him. And so he vows vengeance on him for creating him and then abandoning him, and goes out to find him. In his travels, he saves a girl from drowning, but when people see him with the almost drowned girl, they blame him and shoot him and chase him away. When he finally gets to Victor's home, he runs into his little brother in the woods, and at first he wants to keep the child with him so that he has a friend who isn't old enough to know that he's supposed to hate people who are different. But when he asks the boy his name, he hears the name Frankenstein, and he is in a fit of rage and kills the boy. Then he leaves a locket that the boy had on him in the pocket of the servant who was out looking for him, and that is why she is basically framed and convicted of the boy's murder. He tells Victor Frankenstein this story, and then tells him that he will continue to plague his life if he does not create for him a bride, so that he can have a companion who doesn't hate him. Victor Frankenstein feels sorry for the creature that he has created and wants to make up for having abandoned him. But he is also afraid of what the creature might do if he doesn't comply, so he says that he will. And then we move on into the third section of the book. Victor Frankenstein does not want to create the bride near his family or at his home, so he travels to the British Isles with his friend Henry Clerval, and he's out in the Orkney Isles and has the bride almost completed when he starts for the very first time to question what he is doing. He starts to wonder what would happen if the bride doesn't like the monster. But what really stops him is he becomes afraid that his creature and the bride will procreate and create a new species that will dominate mankind. He cuts up the body he had already made, and the creature who has been following him all this time sees him do it and tells him that he will regret that decision and that he will see him on his wedding night. Victor Frankenstein takes the body parts out onto the ocean and drops them in the water. He gets stuck in a storm. When he gets back to shore, he's not really sure where he is, and the people who are on shore immediately accuse him of murder. He then finds out that his friend, Henry Clerval, has been killed, and he becomes sick with grief once again, even confesses to his death being his fault, but he is acquitted because they find out that he was in a different place than where Henry was killed. His father comes and escorts him home. Unlike the way he treats his child, his father is a very caring and gentle parental figure who wants the best for him. His father convinces him that he should finally marry his fiancée Elizabeth, who he has grown up with. Victor Frankenstein tells his fiancée Elizabeth that there is something major going on, but rather than tell her what it is, he says, "I'll tell you after our wedding night," because he believes that the creature will be trying to kill him on their wedding night, and he hopes that he'll have already caught the creature by then and have proof, and that the danger will be past. But he is very anxious and intense until the night of the wedding. He's looking for the creature and thinking about how he's going to defend himself, and the creature kills his wife instead. He goes mad with grief. His father dies of grief. They never say what happens to the middle brother. When he comes to his senses, he's in a madhouse, and they let him go. But he goes to the police to try and get help to chase down the creature. They do not believe what he is saying, so he chases the creature into the wilderness, and that is where the explorers find him. When he has finished telling his story, his conditions worsen and he dies. The captain of the ship finds the creature weeping over his body, and he asks him why he is weeping when he was the one who caused the torment of Victor Frankenstein. And the creature essentially says that he was never given a chance to be anything but a monster, and that he never wanted to torment anyone, but he had been driven to it based on the way the world had treated him. And he gives us yet another very devastating quote. "Am I to be thought the only criminal when all humankind sinned against me? Why do you not hate Felix, who drove his friend from the door with contumely? Why do you not execrate the rustic who sought to destroy the savior of his child? Nay, these are virtuous and immaculate beings. I, the miserable and the abandoned, am an abomination to be spurned at and kicked and trampled on. Even now my blood boils at the recollection of this injustice." Because the true and original monster in this story is not the creature, but man, and very particularly Victor Frankenstein. The creature was treated like a monster from the very beginning, and so he became one. So that was Mary Shelley's original story. Let's see how film has adapted it over time. I'm going to talk about them in chronological order of when they were filmed, because I think that tells a really interesting story about the different ways that society has been reacting to these themes of ostracization, agency, and a responsibility to what we have created. We'll start with the 1931 film Frankenstein, which is what most of our iconic knowledge of the story of Frankenstein comes from. It begins with a concerned Elizabeth speaking to a concerned Henry Clerval about where Victor Frankenstein is and what he's doing. They visit him right at the moment when he is bringing his creature to life, and that is the iconic Frankenstein's monster that we're familiar with the bolts in his neck and the wide head. So he brings him to life, and he makes an attempt to teach him language and things, but his assistant is very cruel to the creature and teases him essentially until he reacts violently, kills the assistant, and escapes. After he has escaped, he comes upon a little girl who is throwing petals into the water. When she runs out of flowers, not knowing what he is doing, the monster throws the little girl in the water as well and drowns her. The villagers find out about this, get very angry. They chase the creature into a mill and burn it to the ground, and Victor Frankenstein and Elizabeth get married. It really only depicts the first third of the novel, and it changes a lot of the narrative so that Victor Frankenstein is more likable and doesn't make as many mistakes, and gives him and Elizabeth a happy ending. In the 1930s, there were codes about what you were allowed to put on film, and you weren't allowed to put anything that challenged the status quo too much or allowed for morally gray or anything morally ambiguous. So they chose to make Victor Frankenstein more of a hero and less of a morally ambiguous protagonist, at the cost of how the creature is depicted, because even though you still feel empathy for him when he is burned alive and you understand that he's innocent despite the harm he's doing, it still feels more like that is a necessary evil to destroy this creature rather than try to reach out to him or understand him. It very much, in that way, perpetuated the concept of othering rather than pushing back against it like the original novel did. Moving on, we have the sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, in which the creature did not die in the mill after all. He comes out of it alive, and he goes to Victor Frankenstein and demands that he make him a bride, but Victor Frankenstein will not. But another scientist, Batarius, introduces himself to Dr. Frankenstein and tries to convince him that he should make the bride. Meanwhile, the creature wanders into the house of a blind hermit, and they become friends until the mob chases him away. He finds refuge in a crypt where he runs into Batarius, and Batarius convinces him to kidnap Elizabeth, which he does, and Victor Frankenstein does create the bride. And again, we have another very, very iconic moment where the bride is brought to life, and instead of embracing the creature, she rejects him, and so the creature allows Victor and Elizabeth to escape, but burns down the house with himself, the bride, and Batarius inside. Introducing Batarius gives the audience a clear-cut villain, again, to kind of take away some of that ambiguity and morally gray aspects of both the monster and Victor Frankenstein. Having those clear-cut villains and clear-cut heroes allowed Hollywood to support rather than question the status quo. So next we have Young Frankenstein, a satire made in the 1970s by Mel Brooks. It is not so much an adaptation of Mary Shelley's novel as an adaptation or parody of the 1930s films Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. In this story, it is not about Victor Frankenstein, but his grandson. He is also a scientist, but does not like living in the shadow of his crazy grandfather who famously brought corpses to life. But he inherits his grandfather's estate, and so he travels to Transylvania to claim the estate. And there he discovers his grandfather's journal about how he had brought a corpse to life. So, of course, he goes and follows suit. The monster comes to life and escapes, and like he did with his grandfather, he wreaks havoc on and terrifies the villagers, who are all very angry that a corpse has been brought to life yet again. In this version, however, Dr. Frankenstein captures the creature to keep him from wreaking too much havoc and makes an effort to reach out to him and show him love. And of course, it is done in a very satirical way, but it is still what Victor Frankenstein should have done. So he tries to take him on a sideshow. The audience doesn't like the show very much and boos him off the stage, so he freaks out again, and they are once again chasing the monster, trying to mob him and call for his blood. So Dr. Frankenstein does a procedure where they share half of the brain with each other. Then he's apparently smart enough and nice enough for the mob not to hate him anymore, so they don't chase him out of town anymore. I do not love the way that women are portrayed in this version, particularly in a story that has an element of someone feeling entitled to a woman as a through line in every version. This one, in a very comedic way, almost seems to perpetuate that idea, but it does push back on the idea of ostracization. But there are some problematic scenes where women's agency are not being respected, and it's played almost like a comedic version of assault, which is not really cool. Unsurprisingly, the 1990s adaptation, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, is the most accurate to the book that I have seen. It starts, like the book, with an explorer sailing to the North Pole. The ship gets stuck in the ice, and his crew wants to turn back, but he does not. And then they see the humanoid creature, and then they find Victor Frankenstein, who is ill and dying. And Frankenstein tells them his story. Like in the book, Frankenstein was raised with his ward and very close with both his parents. But in this version, his mother dies of childbirth, giving birth to his younger brother, William. He then goes away to college, vowing that no one should have to die and that he will conquer death. He goes and he meets his friend Henry Clerval and begins his work assembling a creature. His fiancée Elizabeth is worried about him because she hasn't heard from him in a while and comes to see what is wrong, but he won't tell her and continues with his creature anyways. As soon as he creates the creature, he is appalled by what he has done. So the creature wanders and finds the hovel and the cottage and learns to speak and develops, again, a parasocial relationship with the inhabitants of the cottage. There is a creditor who is being rough with the grandfather. He's a grandfather instead of a father in this depiction. And he intervenes, but there's a misunderstanding, and the family thinks that it was him who was being rough with the grandfather, and they chase him away. Like in the book, he finds the journal of how Victor Frankenstein brought him to life, and he decides to trace Victor Frankenstein back to his home. Meanwhile, Victor Frankenstein has left college and is traveling with his fiancée and best friend, and just as they arrive home, they find that the youngest brother has been killed, and the longtime servant Justine is accused of his murder. Just like in the book, the creature took the locket that the little boy had and put it in the servant's pocket. Unlike in the book where there is an actual trial, the villagers mob the jail and hang the the accused murderer, even though, of course, she is completely innocent. The monster makes himself known to Victor Frankenstein and tells him that there will be more havoc if he does not comply and make him a bride. So Victor Frankenstein pulls out his apparatuses and begins work on making a bride, but the body that the creature brings him is Justine. When Victor sees that body, he can't do it. He can't bring himself to defile the body of someone who was more or less a member of the family. So the monster storms off, and Victor tries to call off the wedding, but in this version, Elizabeth is the one who steps forward and says, "No, marry me today. I know I want to marry you no matter what your big secret is, and you can tell me all about it in the morning." And so they proceed to get married, and the monster kills the wife. In grief, Victor Frankenstein takes the body of his dead wife and brings her to life. She remembers him, but she does not come back the same, and is equally curious about the creature as she is about Victor Frankenstein. The creature and Victor kind of fight over her a little bit, and she's just too traumatized to cope with it, and she catches herself on fire and burns down the house. Victor, once again, follows the monster out into the wilderness, trying to capture him. It more or less follows the book faithfully, with a few things shortened. It doesn't have the part where Victor Frankenstein is accused of murder or put in a madhouse, which I understand for pacing why they would need to shorten that a little bit. But it was a little bit of a shame, because that, to me, was when the creature gets his true revenge, is when Victor is also being ostracized the way the creature has been ostracized. In this depiction, like in the novel, you see more ambiguity and gray area about who is the villain versus who is the monster, because even though it's hard not to feel compassion for the creature, he is still killing innocent people intentionally to hurt Dr. Frankenstein. And even though Victor Frankenstein is playing with things he shouldn't be playing with, and not taking responsibility for them, not asking for help or doing anything to try and solve the problem, I would say his redeeming quality is that he does care very deeply for his friends and family. In that sense, you don't necessarily want bad things to happen to him, because you know that it would affect all these other people. What I did like about this adaptation that is not in the book is that Elizabeth is given a little more agency. She's involved with the story a little bit more and seems more curious and questioning of what is going on with Frankenstein. And I liked that it was her choice, not his, or to wait until after the wedding to talk about what was going on. Also, that unlike in Bride of Frankenstein, it is her choice to burn herself down. In Bride of Frankenstein, the bride still had the agency to reject the creature, but in this depiction, she also has the choice to decide what her fate is. And she decides that she did not want to be brought back to life. And so another version of Frankenstein that I watched was the Frankenstein plotlines in Penny Dreadful. I want to remind you that there will be many spoilers, and while the films we have been talking about prior to this are mostly films that you have probably seen, they've all been out a long time, and there's a lot of references to them in pop culture. Penny Dreadful is a little newer. It might not be as well known, and it is really good. I think everyone should watch it. Now that I have seen it, I will probably rewatch it like as often as I rewatch Buffy the Vampire Slayer. If you haven't seen it, you might want to drop off here. So, in Penny Dreadful, one of the main, but not the main character, is Victor Frankenstein. I feel he's the most book accurate Victor Frankenstein as far as like his character and personality go. Very brilliant in the science department, but doesn't know much what's going on socially, which I feel is accurate for how Mary Shelley wrote him in the book. And also that he's a little on the younger side. We first see him interacting with his creatures when he creates a creature who calls himself Prometheus. And he very, very kindly and tenderly is teaching him how to speak and how the world works until another creature comes and kills him. And we learn that Prometheus was not Victor Frankenstein's first creature, but his second, that he was trying to do a better job with, but he had abandoned his first creature, who calls himself John Clare. John Clare demands that he make him a bride because he is lonely and the world will not accept him as he is. Throughout the first and second season, John Clare gives off a little bit of an incel vibe where he is very much like the creature in the book, feels that he is owed particularly a wife. And he seems to have a crush on pretty much any girl who will talk to him, even though there are plot lines that show that the world is cruel to him, like when the blind girl who works at a wax museum traps him to put him in a zoo of freaks. There are also several times in which people are kind and accepting to him, but he doesn't notice. But it isn't really until the third season that we see John Clare grow as a character, because he remembers his son he had before he died, and he goes and seeks out the family that he had had in life. His wife even accepts him in corpse form exactly as he is, and he is happy with his family for a little bit until his son dies, and his wife tells him that if he doesn't bring his son back to life, not to come home. But he chooses not to because he doesn't want to do that to someone that he loves, which is the exact opposite of the choice he made in the beginning of the series when he demanded that Victor Frankenstein make him a bride to cure his loneliness, regardless of whether or not someone wanted to be brought back to life. And so we really see like a progression of growth in his character, going from someone who thinks the world owes him something to someone who is willing to sacrifice his needs for someone that he cares about, which I thought was a very beautiful arc for the character to have. But the more, I would say, prominent Frankenstein plotline in Penny Dreadful is actually not about John Clare. It is about the bride that Frankenstein creates for him. The bride, played by Billie Piper. In season 1, she is a prostitute with consumption who is in love with one of the main characters. But towards the end of that season, while she is dying, Victor Frankenstein strangles her to death so that he can use her for the bride that his creature is demanding. It gets a little on the icky side. He fondles her body before bringing her back to life, and while he's teaching her to speak and how the world works, he decides that he is actually in love with her rather than being willing to give her to the creature. And she seems uninterested in the creature anyways, and seems to reciprocate his feelings. He tells her that she is his cousin and that John Clare was her fiance before she had an accident, and that's why she doesn't remember. But when she goes out into the world more, she lures a man to his death by strangling him during sex and leaves Victor Frankenstein for Dorian Gray, and reveals that she had actually known all along that Victor had strangled her and brought her back to life, but was sort of playing along until she was able to gather enough like power and strength to enact vengeance on the world, essentially, for having treated her so wrong in her life. She gathers up other prostitutes and forgotten or mistreated women and starts to assemble an army for her revenge. Victor Frankenstein at first wants to kill her to stop her from being so bloodthirsty, but his friend Dr. Jekyll convinces him to instead give her a serum that will make her docile so that she will be the way she used to be. Dorian Gray helps Dr. Frankenstein kidnap her so that he can give her the serum, but she begs him not to, explaining how cruel it would be to take away her agency and her sense of self just so that she can be what he wants her to be to him. Eventually, he sees the error of his ways and lets her go, but by then Dorian Gray has dispersed the army and she is left on her own. I loved this plot line. I thought it was very, very well done, very well scripted, and very well performed. It was a good exploration for what might have happened if the bride had been created, that really gives agency to the bride in the same way that the creature voices the pain of ostracization. Billie Piper's bride was able to voice the pain of how women have been treated historically, and particularly like poorer and more forgotten women who are seen as objects or something to complete a man rather than their own being with their own thoughts and feelings. All right, so lastly, we're going to talk about Del Toro's version, the new one that you probably haven't seen yet, or maybe you have. I don't know. So, Pan's Labyrinth is my absolute favorite movie ever. So, I was really excited when I heard that Del Toro was making a Frankenstein movie. And I would say that I was not disappointed. I thought it was really, really good. In this version, in the same way that Victor Frankenstein was made to be more or less blameless in the 1930s adaptation, this one kind of swayed the other way, where, again, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but there were some changes made from the book that go more towards the theme of Dr. Frankenstein is the true monster, which I think is only fair considering how much of an impact the 1930s version has had on the way society thinks of Frankenstein. So it seems only fair to kind of swerve it in the other direction. While the 1930s version was afraid to question the status quo, Del Toro's version not only questions but outright condemns the status quo in asking who was the real monster. Another main theme that is in the original book but was really drawn out in Del Toro's version is the idea that your child is its own living, breathing human and not your legacy. In this version, Victor Frankenstein rejects his creature when he realizes he wasn't what he expected or wanted him to be. I think that opens it up as a metaphor for a lot of different things. It could very easily be a queer metaphor or metaphor of disability, a racial metaphor. It could easily be a trans metaphor, in various different forms in which parents sometimes reject their children when they are not what they expected them to be. Ultimately, I think the creature's pain is what draws people to the story, and I think really that is why we are so drawn to the story of Frankenstein and why society has continued to revisit it over the years, is because of the theme of ostracization and how many of us can really relate to that in some way or another. Whether you're being ostracized for your race or your sexuality or your gender nonconformity or your disability or any other number of things, Many people, too many people, have experienced some form of ostracization in their life. And I think most of us can really relate to the creature's loneliness. And even though we aren't able to condone his murdering of innocent people in reaction to that, we feel that pain that drives him to it. So it was nice to see Del Toro's version, or highlight the circumstances over the actions of the monster, and you should go see it. I think that's all.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing to Ink Spills if you enjoy fairy tales, Gothic literature, poetry, book recommendations, or writing.